we know as scouters in our units what are the medical risks of our scouts and our troop. Okay, so on all scouting events, we need which forms? A and B, that's right. So that's going to be your consent form, which is part A from the Guardians, and part B is your general information and health history. Okay, when you're going to a camp that's more than 3 days or 72 hours, an activity that's more than 72 hours, what form do you need in addition to that? Part C, which is the physical. Okay, so when you go on the high adventure trips, there's 4 high adventure bases. They may have additional physical strains. So when you are going to one of those high adventure bases, you want to make sure you understand the risk factors when you go and take that physical, and let the physician know at that time the additional risk factors in the activities on top of just I'm going to summer camp. Prescription medications and over-the-counter medications, that's a big one, what you're going to have on the Part B. You need to know, do I have a scout that is asthmatic and he needs to have an inhaler? Do I have a scout that's ADD and he needs to take his medication in the morning or in the evening? Those are all the things that we need to know as scouters when we go on any outdoor activity. Risk factors, that's the biggest thing that we need to know as scouters. What are the risk factors that we have in our troop from our scouts, from our scouters, and even parents and siblings that are coming on some of the activities? Some of them could be a little bit overweight, which I was up until about, I don't know, a couple months ago. And I've been going on, we went on a hike last year and my knees were killing me afterwards. I'm like, I need to drop some tonnage. So, but that is something that you need to be aware of, because if you're over a certain body weight, certain percentage, they don't recommend you going on long distance activities far away from roadways. So those are some things to be aware of. Asthma is one of them. Sleep apnea. As leaders and adults, you need to have if you require CPAP, you need to have your personal CPAP with a way to power it without being able to recharge it, whether it's going to be a battery pack, whatever, some of those factors. That's something that I have, and I've had to get a rechargeable portable CPAP just to take on the backcountry. Took it to summer camp with spare batteries. So those are some things to be aware of. The resource that I printed out here that you can choose to take back to your troops is just a starting point. You can expand upon it. You may be implementing something very similar to this. This is a troop emergency response plan and a medical alert list. So this form, you would have your medical chair, whoever is responsible for going over the part A and B and C if applicable for that outing, and they're going to outline the participants that are the ones that are more at risk, and they'll identify the conditions that you need to be aware of. I've got diabetics, I've got scouters that have sleep apnea, things of that nature, and any prescription medications or over-the-counter medications that they need. You can put this in the front of your binder as these are the scouts and scouters that we need to look at particularly close at their A, B, and C, instead of going through, in our case, in some of our summer camps, 50 or 60 forms and read every single one of them for the camp out. We know which ones we need to give extra attention to. So that's just a tool and tip that we could use on there. Another thing, talking with Carolyn, that she mentioned that the Girl Scouts do, which is a really great idea. We don't have the tour permit so that anymore as a requirement, but it's something that is really good to identify is where is the closest hospital or medical clinic, where's the closest ranger stations, fire stations, and emergency response areas, and what are the contacts to those areas. So there's a place on this form that you could fill that out, identify who are the contacts, who's the contacts in the council, who are the contacts with the troop at home, any emergency contacts that we need. It's all in one place right in the front of your medical binder with all your forms. So if you guys look at this FAQ form, mine's all highlighted, but on the top right corner you'll see there's little QR codes. You can take your smartphone, you can scan that code, and they'll pull you up to the BSA website, and that expands upon many of the health risk factors that they recommend all scouters familiarize yourself with. One of them is excessive body weight, obesity, some of the things to be aware of, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, which is blood pressure, high blood pressure, epilepsy, asthma, sleep apnea, allergies or anaphylaxis, ingrown toenails, musculoskeletal injuries, orthopedic surgeries, psychiatric, psychological, emotional difficulties, and things to kind of prepare yourself for. So you're familiar with those conditions. And if you've got a scout that when you've received their A, B, and C, and there's a new condition that you don't know anything about, all of these risk factors and the little blurbs that the BSA gives you is only about a paragraph or two. Best practices, get some extra information from your medical professional if you don't have the knowledge and expertise. So leading into one of the medical conditions that we deal with in our troop and that I thought would be very beneficial to share with you guys, and in case you have scouts or scouters, or you get new scouts or scouters coming in with this condition, some tips on how to deal with them. I'd like to invite up a few of the members of our troop. Elijah Lidget, his mother Kristen, and Gigi. So I'd like them to come up, as well as our Scoutmaster Robert Green and his son Anthony Green. So if you guys haven't grabbed one of these already, there's some on the few of the tables here. Anthony Green here, some of you may have recognized him from the fair. Did everyone go to the fair this year? Did anyone get to see the quiet room? No one saw the quiet room? So, Anthony, why don't you give a little blurb on what you did at the fair this year? He loves speaking in front of people, by the way, guys. Just so you know. Start off with yourself.
That made it worse.
Hey, there's no one here. They're little Smurfs.
Yeah. You're not speaking in front of 100 people this time. Well, I'm type 1 diabetic. And for my Eagle Scout project, I actually wanted to do something that helped promote diabetes and
awareness
and brought awareness to it. So I started looking for an Eagle Scout project that had that, but then I was offered an Eagle Scout project from the Kerwin County Fair that allowed me to incorporate that with a room called the Quiet Zone. That was a space where people that have a sensitivity to sights and sounds or that have diabetes can go sit and calm down or desensitize to the lights. There was a space where there's a stripes container set aside for diabetics, type 1 and type 2, and they could test and have a nice air conditioning space where they can take their insulin.
Thank you, Anthony. So this is actually one of the handouts that Anthony had created and had available as handouts in the Quiet Zone. So I do not take credit for this, but this is a great resource. I recommend everyone take one of these home. And this basically is a diabetes 101. What is the difference between type 1 diabetes? What's the difference between type 2 diabetes? Yes. So does anyone here have diabetes? You're type 2? Okay. Who has no idea the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes? I didn't until I met this guy. So you do not know?
I'm reading it right now.
Okay, sorry. All right, so this is Elijah. Elijah is another one of our scouts in our troop. He actually is my son, Aiden. Where did he go? I don't know where he went.
I think he disappeared to the bathroom.
So he's my son's best friend, and we learned a lot about type 1 diabetes from this young man right here. And because of the relationship and the education that I received from his parents, he was able to come and join us with scouting, do some of the activities that his parents may not have felt very comfortable with without having built that relationship. So Elijah, can you tell me what is the difference between type 1 diabetes and what is the difference between type 2 diabetes?
Well, no one knows exactly how you get type 1 diabetes. You can just get it from getting a certain medication or something that basically your body doesn't know what it is and triggers diabetes. Type 2 you get from having too much sugar and not enough insulin, so you have to get more insulin to counteract the sugar that you eat.
Okay, so Kristen is a nurse practitioner, so she is the medical mouth on what is the scientific difference between a type 1 and type 2 diabetic.
So type 1 is autoimmune. So your immune system's triggered. So basically your immune system shuts down your body's
ability to produce insulin. So type 1, that's what that is. So your body just stops making insulin, period. So these two kids up here, they have to have insulin. So you guys going on a scouting adventure, these two boys have to take insulin with them. They have to test, they have to have insulin when they eat, they have to have insulin with them, they have to have emergency sugar with them in case their blood sugar drops. So they have to be prepared, they have to have a way to check their blood sugar, they have to have somebody trained to be able to check their blood sugar, and somebody trained with them to be able to be an emergency responder as well. In case their blood sugar drops and, you know, they're confused, incoherent, they don't know what to do. So, you know, as a parent myself, I had to make sure that there was somebody else who knew how to do that. And I know, like, when we first started joining scouting, Mr. Green started freaking out. He's like, another type 1 diabetic? I don't know about this. And he's got a type 1 son himself. So I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, you know, I've, you know, talked to Mr. Moore, like I've trained Mr. Moore. He knows, you know, how to help an emergency response. Elijah knows how to give his own insulin. He's known how to give it his own insulin since he's 5. He knows how to check his blood sugar. He knows he's on an insulin pump. He knows how to put in his own site. He's very good. So
This is my insulin pump.
it's just knowing how to train somebody else to be able to be that backup to, hey, this is what to do in an emergency, you know, making sure that there's adequate supplies on a camp out and make sure that there's other people that know what to do in an emergency and that there's adequate supplies. Type 2 diabetes is different because basically the body doesn't respond to the insulin the same way. Either the body, because there's too much, there's overweight and the body's just resistant to the insulin that's there, or the body's just not producing enough. So those are the differences. So.
And insulin, for those of you who don't know, insulin is the hormone that your body uses to metabolize the blood sugars and store and use the sugars to store it either as fat or burn or utilize it as energy. Type 1 diabetics don't create insulin. They depend on insulin from an outside source, either through a pump, which Elijah uses here, or through a syringe or pen. And this is a glucagon pen. Correct?
No.
This is what you use for your delivery.
This
now?
is an insulin pen.
Nice. So that's new to me because I've always seen the syringe and vial. So there's multiple delivery systems. So that's why it's good to have your diabetics show you this is what I do. This is how I manage my symptoms, and it's not food related, right? So a type 2 diabetic, your body's producing insulin, right? But your body is resisting that insulin, and you can't burn that sugar and utilize that sugar to bring your blood sugar down. So you have to watch what you eat. You have to watch your sugar intake not to spike it.
And he may take pills, which help his body use that sugar.
Yeah, where a type 2 or a type 1 diabetic, if their blood sugar goes low, they need to take that sugar in to bring it up. If their blood sugar goes high, they take the insulin because their body doesn't create it, and that brings that sugar down. So another thing that's really you need to be aware of is when you have scouts on activities is dehydration. Dehydration is really, really, really huge, especially diabetics, because if your blood sugar is high and you're dehydrated, what happens to your blood sugar levels? Mr. Green, what happens to our blood sugar levels?
His blood sugar goes high.
And that's why I've been just constantly drinking water.
There you go. So,
And if anybody noticed Elisha's service dog, the service dog was going nuts earlier, alerting.
And we were both high.
So we had three diabetics in the room, and she was going bananas.
yeah, Mr.
Vaughn.
Mr. Vaughn.
Mr. Vaughn's diabetic
Yes.
too, so yeah.
What does the dog pick up on?
She can
Smell
smell the blood sugar. So anytime anybody around has a blood sugar that's too high or too low, so anywhere above 180, she will start going nuts. She'll start alerting. If we're not paying attention, she'll start barking at us. I've actually had her body check him to the ground because he wasn't paying attention and wasn't listening.
She's mean sometimes.
Yeah.
Or going below 80, she'll actually do the same thing.
And she'll
So
start barking, pawing.
yeah, she's not supposed to bark or body check, but she will.
Yep.
She will. She'll wake us up in the middle of the night. Yeah.
But not me, because she knows she has to deal with me all day.
She knows that teenagers don't wake up in the middle of the night.
Yep.
So,
But with her around the troop, what have you guys done with the rest of the troop? You guys have trained the rest of the troop how to act around the
How to
dog.
respond to her.
Yeah.
With the dog when she's
Yeah.
working, and
yeah.
so the whole troop has been involved.
Yeah.
and-
They ignore her. They know that she's working.
Yep.
Yes.
So is that the service dog specifically trained for sugar?
Yes,
Or diabetic.
yes, she's a diabetic alert dog, so yeah, she's specifically trained to, and she's Elijah's service dog. So, we really haven't taken her to many campouts. I think Elijah,
Any of them.
yeah.
Yeah, I heard it camp.
Yeah,
Mhm.
camp
She's
roll.
been to Camp Roll.
Yep.
Because, my husband went on the camp out, so, if my husband's able to go, we'll do that. We just haven't really sent her to too many
Yeah.
campouts yet, but,
And that does bring up another aspect, if you do have a service dog, you need to make sure that where you're going, doesn't have any animal risks.
Restrictions.
Legally, pretty much anywhere in California, she can go anywhere.
She
But
can.
the things you have to be aware of are if there's any predator risks,
Like
mountain
Yosemite.
lions and,
They-
things like that.
They
So
went on a hike at Yosemite, she can't go up there because of the mountain lions. So we're like, okay, we can't do that one, somebody would have to stay at camp, that wouldn't be a good idea.
So those are some things you'll need to incorporate into your planning on some activities. If she's gonna go on a hike with him, is it appropriate for the dog?
Can he handle a pack? Can he handle her and a pack?
Those types of
like
things.
that.
And then we'll evaluate with the parent on a case-by-case basis, if it makes sense for the parent to stay home or stay at the campground with the dog, or if it's appropriate for the dog to participate in the activity. Some of the other things, what are some of the things you experienced, Robert, in scouting that the doctors never told you about? I know one of them was altitude.
So altitude it absolutely affects it. It affects his numbers go up or down. And I've had to incorporate backup systems. Like Mrs. Stringer's our backup system. She helped Anthony the second go around with NYLT. The first go around failed. It was a disaster because his numbers went through the roof, and then it's just nobody else knew what to do as well. And so it's been a huge learning curve for me and him in scouting. When he was diagnosed in December of 2013, I had went to the council and asked, hey, this has just happened. What are the rules? What are the regulations? Do you guys have anything in writing? And Mr. Moore has provided that piece of paper there. It's a very short clip. That's it. And it was a huge learning curve, not only for us to figure out what we need to do with this insulin, how to protect it. Sharks on a trail is a whole different story too. Gatorade bottles with the big mouth and cram them all in worked really good for a weekend, but what do you do for a week-long summer camp? He's old enough to where he's self-sufficient now, as well as Elijah. He knows what's going on and what he needs to do, but there's other
Not all
times
kids are
when,
like that.
when they first come in, they don't know. They're still learning themselves. Week-long summer camps were an issue. A lot of them want you to turn in your medications and stuff like that. Well, when we went to Hawaii, I went down to pick up his stuff so he could take his stuff for the night, and his needles are in the refrigerator and the insulin's sitting on the packet on top of it. No, just give it back.
Because it needs to be the other way around.
Because it's supposed to be the other way around.
Yeah.
We've dealt with cold weather and hot weather, and I asked every time we were in large groups with other troops and other councils, have you ever had to experience this? And my answer was always no. I've never dealt with that. We've never had a type 1 diabetic in the troop. I personally have never ran across another one other than my son until Elijah came into our troop. And it kind of dumped back on me. A couple of the roundtables that I've gone to over the past couple of years, I've had other people come and ask me as soon as I announce it or as soon as they overhear us talking about it, well, how did you deal with extreme cold? Well, he sleeps with this stuff. He's got a little pack that's a little bigger than this. Sometimes he'll slip a sock on it, but he'll keep it close to him, close to his body. It helps keep that insulin warm enough to where it doesn't freeze. In the summertime, as we go to Death Valley, or just in the summertime when it's 90+ degrees, you can buy the little pouches that, who has ever seen the little snakes that go around your neck that have the beads in them and swell up? Okay, well they make that same exact thing, but it's a pouch like this. You slide your insulin to it, the air goes through it, the water evaporates, and it controls that temperature.
Yeah, I sell them on Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah, they sell them on Amazon.
Yeah.
So to kind of go.
Activities, your blood sugar, so when you're active all day long, people don't know this, but
And you keep,
you continue to burn sugar and whatnot for a good 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours afterwards. So your blood sugar could drop at like 2, 3, 4, 5
Yes.
o'clock in the morning.
So
And
that's
it happens.
We generally do not want our scouts to have food and things of that nature in the tents. This is an exception for medical reasons. So you need to make sure you have some way to contain those smellables. They need to have juices, whether it be the little tablets.
and it's minimum too. So they'll have enough stuff in their tent to go, oh, my blood sugar's low. Here's my juice box. Here's a glucagon tablet. And then they both know to either find an adult or find an older scout to get them to an adult. These two they don't share a tent, but they usually stay pretty close together.
And
And
their buddies usually
Their tent
know
buddies know
enough
exactly
too.
what's going on too. Like Aiden is usually Elijah's tent buddy most of the time. Anthony will have a different tent buddy, but they know how to communicate what's going on, and if there's a problem, he needs to take his juice or his glucagon tablet and go get one of the adults. Usually it's,
And for YPT purposes, we need to let whoever their tent buddy, their parents know, hey, in the middle of the night, we're probably gonna have an adult peek their head into your son's tent that's not, just to check on our diabetic scouts. So those are some things that need to be aware of. Generally, as an adult, we don't wanna go into the tent that's not our own scout. This is kind of an exception for medical reasons. We need to make sure whoever's buddying up with them is okay with that. So.
Time's up.
Well, thank you very much. The main reason we want to sit here is we are, all one troop, Troop 47. We wanted to put a face to type 1 diabetes. So if you have a scout and you get a scout that has type 1 diabetes and you don't know where to go, here's a resource here in the council. And these are your experts. So, yes, sir.
In 2010, Sherry Stringer and I were scout